Okay, so to start off, if you can hear like annoying buzzing in the background, I apologize. I'm using my laser engraver to do a different project right now, so it's running and you might be able to hear it. But what we're going to do today is start off with kind of the first foundational piece, even though we're not technically doing a foundation, of our Revit exercises that we're going to follow along in with class. So as we progress through the class lectures, we are going to continue adding on to this project. So it's important that even if you miss a day, you go back and watch the recording for that day so that this way you are staying on track with the project. Because if you miss one day and then come and then just start working on, the site before you have the other part done, things might get a little bit wonky. So for our Revit class projects or kind of smaller progress assignments, we are going to be creating the same structure that we did for our major CAD project. So there are just some details here again reminding you about what the different materials are for like the exterior walls, and then the interior walls we'll also go over for how to place that, and the different windows, the doors, the foundation, and the floor, and just what those are going to be made out of. So again, we can see just those drawings in our CAD assignment. So we'll be kind of going back and forth between the CAD instructions to help us along with Revit, just to get a good idea of how the different features work for placing dimensions and placing in our walls and our windows. A thing that we, again, have to keep in mind is that Revit is a three-dimensional modeling software compared to AutoCAD, which does have 3D capabilities, but we've been using it as 2D. So like I mentioned in the previous lecture, like this is a window, this symbolizes that it's a window, but to AutoCAD, this is just a series of rectangles and lines. It doesn't know that this itself is an actual window, versus Revit will know. So Revit's going to take care of a lot of those symbols and stuff for us, but we do then have to keep in mind kind of some construction concepts as we go through it. So I'll be kind of going back and forth between the AutoCAD drawings just to reference things and the Revit ones, and I encourage you to have those printed copies of the drawings that I gave you on hand just so you can kind of reference them as you're working through things. So I have here Revit, and I'm just going to start a new model. Remember that there's that difference between models and families, so this is just going to be like an entire building, and then this could be different components or different pieces of furniture that go in a building. We can also model different kind of masses for things, but I've only ever played with families like once or twice, and to me it's really complicated. I'd rather 3D model in like Inventor or Fusion and then just import it into here. But I'm just going to start a new model, and from the different options you can choose a couple of different ones. Architectural is sometimes nice, but I find occasionally there's too much information in here. Or, excuse me, actually architectural is the one we want. I was going to say if we go into browse, residential is sometimes nice, but a lot of times there's too much stuff in there and then it kind of overcomplicates things, particularly for a beginner. So I would recommend that you start with the architectural template. I was getting them mixed up, and I just accidentally clicked on the metric one, so I want to make sure I'm using imperial architectural. I'm off to a great start, and I'm just going to leave it set to a new project instead of a project template. I might want to start a new project template if I want to make a lot of, like custom walls that I know I'm going to be using over and over again. But for this, I'm just going to do a new project and click OK. And let it load up. And so again, I'm now just in a regular level 1 floor plan. These here are my elevation indicators. So I want to make sure that whatever I'm drawing inside this area. And then I've got my project browser where I could switch between my different views. So if I wanted to go to level 2 or level or to any of the elevations, I can change through here. I almost always, when I'm starting to, will just minimize this ceiling plan one So that way the ceiling plans aren't there and I don't accidentally click on a ceiling plan instead of the floor plan, because I notice students do that a lot. And if you don't know that you clicked on the ceiling plan and you're not even sure what this reflected ceiling plan is for, it's very easy to make that mistake and then things not go the way you want and get frustrated. So that's why I'll just minimize it so that way I don't accidentally click on it. But I'm just going to start off by drawing walls for my building. So my building itself is going to be 24 by 12, just my overall exterior. And again, it does have those different materials to it. So we've got our 1x6 clapboard siding. Then I'm going to have my 1/2-inch piece of plywood. And then, or is it 3/4? Let me double check. It's a 1/2-inch piece of plywood. And then we have our 2x6 wall stud. And our studs are going to be spaced 16 inches on center. We're not going to need to know that right now for Revit, but just always remember that our studs are 16 on center. And then a 1/2-inch piece of gypsum wallboard on the inside. So we can still put all of those different layers into Revit. And what'll happen is Revit will then be able to still place dimensions for things like core boundaries and just keep track of all that stuff for us. But instead of having to place each one of those lines or layers individually, Revit's going to do that as we work. So if I come up here to the wall tool and click on it, I am going to be placed in just a generic 8-inch wall, especially if I'm just using Revit to think of, whoops, let me hit escape because I started a wall by accident. If I'm using Revit to think up ideas and kind of come up with what I want this model to look like, generic walls would be what I want to model with. But especially right now, I know exactly what I'm making in every single measurement and dimension. So I can just start off the bat with the specific wall that I want. So if I click on where it says that this is generic 8-inch wall, I can look through this list of different wall types that exist. So there's going to load in this architectural template several walls that are often used. So this is a brick and CMU on a metal stud. This is just a brick with a CMU, brick on a metal stud. We've got a couple of different ones in here. We've got different interior walls. A lot of these, particularly since like these ones are fire rated, this is a 1-hour fire rated wall, a 2-hour fire rated wall. Like these, a lot of them are going to be directed more towards like commercial applications. And there is no one in here that is like the exact wall that I want, because I want that one with clapboard siding and then a piece of plywood and then my wood stud and then my gypsum wallboard. It doesn't exist here. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have to make it beforehand. So I'm going to, instead of choosing from this drop down, I'm going to click on Edit Type. And then I'm going to duplicate this wall type, and I'm going to call it exterior wall. And I can even then just say like clapboard siding. You can really name it whatever you want, but again, this is a scenario where, just like with your file names, it's helpful to name something so that way you know what the heck it is when you have to go back and use it later. So if I just name this pee pee poo poo, sure, that's funny and all, but later on when I have to go find this wall type, I'm not going to remember which one I named poo poo pee pee and which one I named pee pee poo poo. So that's why I like to just say, hey, this is the exterior wall and it's clapboard siding, so that way I don't get confused. I'll click OK. And now I have this new wall type up here that I'm going to be able to choose from later on. And then I'm going to come in here and edit its structure. So when I click on edit, it brings up this little menu. Yours will most likely be a little smaller when you first open it, but that's just because I drug this side out to make it larger so I could read the whole thing. And these are just going to be the different layers, the different parts that make up our wall. At the very top of the list is going to be the outside, and then you'll just, in this list, work your way to the inside. So by default, since I'm basing this off of just that generic 8-inch wall that originally existed, there's only this one piece of the wall, and it's just has no material assigned to it because it's generic, and it's 8 inches thick. So I'm going to want to add in several different parts or functions to my wall. So I'm just going to click on insert a couple of times, and it's inserting them in, and then I can move different parts around and then assign them different functions, different materials, and different thicknesses. So I'll usually just put in a few different types, and then I can move them up and down in the list. So this right here, the very first thing I'm going to have, I'm going to give it a function of a finish, because this is going to be my outside finish. And then I can come into this material one and assign it a specific material. So I'll click on where it says by category, and that then makes this little ... ellipses button pop up where I can click on that to go into the material library. Again, yours probably will be a little bit smaller and maybe look like this. So these are all of the materials that are loaded into my project, just my default architectural template. So we've got a couple of different materials we can choose from, and I can come up here at the top and I can search for specific ones. So since this is going to be my outside finish of those 1x6 clapboard, I'm going to just search for clapboard, and in this current project, the material clapboard doesn't exist. If I click on this little up arrow, this then is going to show me all of the different materials Autodesk has in their library, and then clapboard does exist, it's just not loaded into this current project. So I'm going to click on that up arrow to add it into this current project. So now I will be able to select it and use it. If I click on this arrow pointing to the right, that then also lets me see different things related to how this is going to graphically appear in my project, and I can change some of the settings up, and I can also then look at some of the physical properties. So as that building information modeling software, this then is also linked to that information component of the software where I'm getting things about the physical properties and the thermal properties. So that way it can run those analyses of, how is this, what's the R value of this wall, and how much energy is it going to expend to have to heat and cool the building and things like that. So graphically, things that I like to do is check off this use render appearance option for my materials. 9 times out of 10, the color it's going to assign is a nice color that is going to represent what we're looking at pretty well. It's choosing this color based off of whatever specific material pops up in like this image area for when we render something. So it's just doing it based off of the most or similar color or widely used shade in that box. Sometimes when it picks a color here, it's really dark. When we look at sites, and the color it picks for grass is, when you do use render appearance, is a really, really dark green that I don't like. So you can not check that off and then like pick your own specific color out of here. But this then just helps things look a little more visually appealing when you change your styles. And for me, it's also a great visual cue that I have indeed applied a material to something. And then down the line, that's really helpful for when you're rendering things, making those realistic looking visuals. Nothing is, well, never mind. There are more heartbreaking things in life. But for me, a real heartbreaking moment is if I'm doing a rendering and I've waited 2 hours for it to finish, and then I go look at it and I realize that I left something without a material applied to it, and so then I have to start all over again with that 2-hour rendering, because you're just sitting there waiting for it to finish, and then you notice it's not right and you have to do it all over again. That to me is always just real sad. So I like to just check that off so that this way I can see colors for that visual cue. And then you can also apply patterns. So surface pattern is going to be patterns that you might see in an elevation, and cut pattern would be a pattern that we see in a section view. For quite a few materials, since Revit is a lot smarter than AutoCAD, Revit's going to know that like bricks have a cut pattern of those 45-degree lines and where and that they're going to show up in a section view. So Revit will automatically apply stuff in a lot of these boxes, but you can also, of course, make your own custom ones and change things up if that's what you want to do. So, for instance, since I want this to appear with vertical lines, when I'm looking at it in my consistent color option or even just like in an elevation, I'm going to put a surface pattern. So I'm just going to click on that option. And then this gives me different hatch patterns I can apply for this sideboard or this clapboard siding. And there is this vertical option. So I'm just going to click on these vertical lines, click OK. You can assign them to be a specific color. I'm going to leave them as that kind of medium gray because that'll be a nice color in there. It's not going to be overbearing compared to my line work, but it also is going to just create a nice hatch. And then you can also put a background to it. So if you wanted to put like two different hatch patterns overlapping each other, or if you wanted to put a color on a background of something, you can apply it there, but I'm just going to leave that as none. And for my cut pattern as well, when I'm in a section view, I'm going to leave that alone and set to none. If I go back into this appearance tab, I then can change things related to this clapboard siding. So for instance, it's going horizontal right now, and we have vertical siding on our house. So I can come here into the image, and I can scroll down a little bit, and here for position, I can rotate it 90 degrees. I can drag this around, but for me, I'm not going to be able to drag that perfectly to 90. Maybe you can. So I'm just going to highlight that text and just replace it with 90. And then click done. And then that'll just flip it in my picture or in my image. And we can also, with some materials too, like apply a tint to them. So maybe if I just don't like the color that it is, I can apply a tint and I can make this, neon pink. But unless I'm Barbie, I probably don't want my house to be that neon pink color, so we are not going to apply a tint, but I'm just trying to show you some different things that you can do to change it and customize a lot of the stuff in Revit because there's so much you can do for it. And then since Revit knows information or has information fed into it about this sideboard clapping, it knows it's made out of spruce and stuff. Hold on. Okay, sorry, I had to pause and step away. Not that it's going to make any time difference to you, but where was I? So Revit is that information modeling software, so it has some built-in information about the material that this clapboard is made out of. So it's saying here, that it's made out of spruce, and then it's giving me information about the strength of what it can hold, the thermal information, so that this way it could calculate things like the R value of the wall pretty easily, and I can do some, strength analysis test. Not that we're going to be doing any of those in this course, but related to the material. So it has a lot of stuff pre-built in. And that's why it's worth it to spend the time building your walls out correctly this first time around than to just do everything using just like generic or making up stuff kind of as you go. But I'm just going to click on finish for this material. And now I've got this material here. It's now saying that it's made out of clapboard siding. I usually drag this window a bit larger just so I can read everything fully. And then I'm going to apply a thickness. One thing to keep in mind, and I mentioned this in the last class when I introduced just the Revit interface, is that Revit is always thinking in feet. So I want this sideboard, this clapboard, to be made out of 1x6s. So that is going to be a thickness, because that's a nominal amount. So we're going to give it the actual amount of 3/4 of an inch thick. If I just type in, if I get rid of all of this text box, I highlight it and erase it, and I just type in 3/4, enter, or click off of it, even then, so maybe this could be a 2022 update. I hope it is, because what would happen a lot of times is kids would type in like 3/4 or they type in like 0.75. There we go, 0.75. It went through just fine. And it's considering that as 3/4 of a foot, not 3/4 of an inch. So you just always kind of have to keep that in mind. You don't have to put this foot designator and this inch designator, but if you're doing something in only inches, you still do have to put a 0 just to represent that there's 0 feet. And then I could type in 3/4. And now it's going to give this material a thickness of 3/4 of an inch. Then next up, so now we have this first layer of the wall done. Again, I know this is a lot, but it's worth it to apply all of this stuff beforehand. And I'm going to take this next layer. I'm going to move it up because the only thing I'm going to want in the end inside this core boundary is just my wood framing, my wood stud. And I'm going to now make my plywood side sheathing. So I'm going to come into function, and I'm going to give this a function of substrate. And then for the material, again, I'm just going to click on by category and then the ... And I'm going to search for plywood. And plywood sheathing comes up, and I can check that off. And you can check off use render appearance if you want, but for a material like this, since it's going to be sitting in the interior of my building, there's really no point. I'm not going to see it in there, so we don't have to apply a color or use a render appearance for it. For my cut pattern, I am going to come here and just apply a specific pattern to it. So I'm going to come right here and find the plywood one, and then just click OK, so that this way when I go make a section view, it's going to automatically apply this pattern in there for me. I'm not going to have to think about it. And I'm just going to change its color to this dark gray and click OK. So that way, again, when I'm looking at a section view, it's not going to be overbearing in there. And then for my appearance tab and everything, I don't need to go again and change any of this stuff around. I could if I wanted to, but I'm not going to be seeing this in my final result for this particular house. So I don't need to go into any of this stuff. I just wanted to show you the first time around kind of that it's there and it exists. And it's wonderful. So I'll just click OK. And then we're going to have a thickness for our plywood sheathing of a 1/2 inch. If you want to, you don't have to delete the whole text box. You can just click in this like area right above the inch or right in front of the inches and just make that into a 1/2, and then hit enter or click somewhere off of it and it'll register. Then I'm going to keep my core boundary. So this is just going to help us when we're placing dimensions, measure things from stud to stud rather than from finish to finish. So that's why I like to only just put my wood studs or my framing materials inside this core boundary area. We're going to leave this first layer with a thickness or with a function of the structure. And then I'm just going to click on by category, click on that little ellipses, and I'm going to use dimensional lumber for this. So I'm actually going to search for softwood because I know that that's just what it's called in Revit. And I've got softwood lumber here. I'm going to leave all of this stuff alone. I don't need to change any of these functions. And I'll click OK. And since our exterior walls are made out of 2x6s, I'm going to give it a thickness of 5.5. To type that in, I'm just going to do 5 space 1/2, enter, and it gives it a thickness of 5.5 inches. And then I'm going to take this last one and I'm actually going to move it down. So I'm going to click on down and I'm going to give it a function of finish 2. Now, this could just be being completely ignorant. It's happened many times before, but there could be a difference between finish 1 and finish 2. If there is, it is not something I'm aware of. I just always, for whatever reason, give my exterior finish the function of finish 1 and give my interior finish the functions of finish 2. It's just what I do. It's just one of my fun, quirky little little habits. If there is a difference, it is something that I myself am completely ignorant of, and I just haven't bothered to Google or look up. And none of none of my drawings have exploded and ruined my computer, so I guess maybe I'm doing something right. Then for its material, I'm just going to click on that and come to by category, and I'm just going to search for gypsum, and gypsum wallboard is already loaded in here. And then I can check off use render appearance if I'd like to, so that way it just is going to be like an interior white wall. And this one, it already has applied our hatch pattern for us. I am going to come and just change this color to the dark gray. I just like my hatch patterns to not stand out as much when I'm looking at section views. So I'm just going to change its color, and everything else I'm going to leave alone. If you are creating a model and you want to like paint the interior walls, this is not where you would do that though. There is a specific paint function in Revit to do that. So you're not going to necessarily change the colors in here, especially because that is going to change them for like all gypsum wall boards in the project, and we don't want to necessarily make all of our walls one color. We just want to change one particular one. Since this one here was originally that generic 8 inches, that's why it already has a thickness of 8, so I just want to make sure that I change its thickness to a 1/2 inch. And then I've got my entire wall here. Up at the top, it's been keeping track of the materials for me too, so it's got a thermal mass and an R value set. It's keeping track of the total thickness, so I know I did this wall correct because it's supposed to have a total thickness of 7 1/4, and that's what it's coming up with here. And so then I'm just going to click OK, and then click OK again, and then it is a wall type now that I can use. So there was quite a couple of steps for the initial setup for this exterior wall, but then we're able to sail a little bit smoother throughout it. Now, as I'm placing them, I also want to keep in mind the constraints that I have set for where I'm measuring from, where the bottom of my wall is, where the top of my wall is, and all of those different settings can be found here in this properties bar. So if we scroll, there are lots of settings available. We're not going to necessarily touch all of them, but we do want to look at the location line, the base offset, and the top offset. So those are always going to be 3 things that we want to make sure we have set when we're making our walls. If you forget to set any of those, you can always go back and change them after the fact. So they can be, it's not necessarily set in stone, and it's a lot easier to change than, again, if we were working like in AutoCAD. A lot of times with AutoCAD, if you mess something up, it could just be the easier way to fix it is just to delete it and start it over. In Revit, changing things and manipulating things can be a lot easier and faster to do. So we can change those here. There's also ways to change those settings up here in this green bar as well. So we've got location line as an option here in the properties bar, and we also have location line up here. And both of these drop downs are going to give us the exact same information. But since we are creating our building based off of dimensions that are taken from the face of the studs, we're going to want to do all of our measurements as we type them in from the core face exterior. And that's why I made sure that the dimensional lumber or the softwood lumber was the only thing inside that core boundary when I made the wall. So that way this is taking it from the face of the stud. Then our base constraint, that's going to be the bottom of our wall. So since this is a 1-story building, we're going to leave the base constraint set on level 1. It's always going to make the base constraint whatever level you are in for the floor plan too. The top constraint by default is going to be unconnected, and it's just going to make it a 20-foot tall wall unconnected. If you didn't want it to go up to a specific level, you could leave it set as unconnected and then just type in a specific height that you wanted it to be. So for instance, if maybe I was making like a parapet wall for a roof, I don't have a level it's going up to, but I wanted it, to be 3 feet high, so I could change those settings there. In this case, I'm going to change my top constraint, which again, I can change here or I can change here. These are going to be the exact same thing, to say that I want it to go up to level 2. And then later on, I can change where level 2 is, and this wall will follow through it. So very rarely will I ever leave the top constraint as unconnected. I always have a specific end goal of where I want it to go, whether I'm having it go up to the roof or up to level 2 or level 3 or however many levels I decide my building's going to have. So I'm just going to say I want it to go up to level 2. And then whenever you move your cursor out of this box, it just always applies for you automatically. So I don't know why this button's even here. And oftentimes it's really frustrating because maybe I just open up this menu and I just move my cursor so I can see what the heck I'm typing. Like if I come in here and if I am trying to just like get rid of this and type something in, whenever I move my cursor out, it just automatically takes that as me hitting apply. And that can be really frustrating and annoying. So as a heads up, that's probably what's happening. If you are facing any of that, it's just whenever you move your cursor out of this box, it just assumes that that's what you wanted. So I'm going to have it go up to level 2. I've got my location line set as the exterior. I've got my base constraint as level 1, top constraint as level 2. I'm ready to place these 4 walls. A hint for Revit, but again, it can be easily fixed if you do it wrong. Revit takes your wall from exterior to interior and it wants you to draw clockwise. So if I draw counterclockwise, what's going to happen is my wall is going to be with the inside facing out, and I'll show you how you can fix that. So I'm going to intentionally draw counterclockwise just so I can show you like, oh, this thing messed up, but it's something that easily can be fixed if you do. But for your own work, drawing clockwise then makes it easier. So, and it's asking me if I want to save the project. I haven't even put anything down, but sure. I've just been talking for 30 minutes. So I'll put it here, and I'm just going to name it Tech 1728. My last name, my first name, and then Revit intro. And then I'll click save. Revit's also going to save backups for you quite a bit, which is honestly very handy in case it crashes. So anytime you'll see a file and it'll just be your regular file name, but it'll have like 0.000001, 0.0002. Those are just automatic backups it made in case the software crashes. But so again, you probably want to do clockwise. I'm going to do counterclockwise just to let you know that it's no big deal if you mess up. So I'm going to just start my wall, make sure I'm inside my elevation markers, and I'm just going to go 24, enter. I'm going to go up 12, enter. I'm going to go over 24, enter. Or I could also just move my mouse to line those up. And then I'm just going to click to finish it. And a wonderful thing it did was it automatically just connected them into those walls, so I don't have to worry about trimming. And then I've got my beautiful building here. And I'm going to go into a 3D view to look at it so I can see it 3-dimensionally. I'll click on my default 3D, which that's frustrating. It already did it the right way. Unless I was telling you the wrong thing. Maybe it wants you to go counterclockwise, not clockwise. Am I imagining things? Hold on. We're going to experiment. So now I'm going to do a wall, and this time I'm going to go this way instead of that way. Wait, I went clockwise. I'm an idiot. So this time I'm going to go counterclockwise. I'll do 24, 12. I'm so dumb sometimes. So I've got this one here, and now I'll go into my 3D view. So this one's inside out, this one isn't. But if you do draw it inside out, it's very easy to fix. So I'll just hit escape so that this way I'm not in any tool. And I can just click on this wall and hit the space bar, and it flips it. And you can highlight multiple walls at once by just clicking and dragging and spacebar, and then it would flip it. So if you do draw yours inside out, you can easily not make it inside out. But I'll just delete that one. So I just highlighted the whole thing and just hit the delete key on my keyboard, because I'll just stick with the one that was already the right way. And now I'm just going to go back into my level 1 floor plan. I usually double click here rather than switch between my views up here, purely because when I first learned Revit, you didn't have different tabs up here to switch between. So I just got real used to it. But we've got my wall here, or my walls. One thing I like to do too is change my detail level. So if I change my detail level to fine, it's going to show me the different parts or the different components that make up my walls. So these are the different layers and they're set there. By default, you probably are also going to have thick lines set. It just remembered that I liked thin lines because I have used Revit on this computer a couple of times already, since it's, my job. So by default, your lines are going to look a little bit thicker. I almost always prefer drawing with thin lines turned on. So that way it's much easier for me to grab onto like dimensions of things like my studs. Because if I have thin lines turned off, it's really hard to get that stud part. In my finished drawings that I would put on sheets and send to the printer, I'd absolutely want the line weights accounted for, but when I'm working in Revit, I like that thin line option turned on just to see what I need to see. And then also, since I'm going to have these drawings printed in my final version at a 1/4 inch equals a foot scale, I can change that scale here or here. So I'm just going to click on that and change it over to a 1/4 inch equals a foot. If I can read, there it is. And that's just going to change like the scale that the hatches are on, or even like our dimensions when we go to place text and dimensions in. It'll change the size of it automatically, and it takes care of a lot of stuff for us, which is nice and wonderful. So I've got those walls there. Now I'm going to put that interior partition straight down the middle. So I'm going to go back into the wall tool, and I can look through this drop down, but I'm going to tell you right now that there is not one made for our interior partition wall like the way we want it done. So we're just going to have to go into edit type and make a new wall type again. So I'm going to duplicate this wall, and I'm going to call this one interior wall partition. I'm also duplicating it off of the one that we made originally because it's actually going to be pretty fast to redo this one. So this is that exterior wall that I just made these with. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to go into edit the structure, and it's also important that you duplicated it. And I'm going to just delete this clapboard siding, and I'm going to reapply a function here. So I'm going to take this plywood sheathing, and I'm going to give it this now a function of a finish. And again, it could be finish 1 or 2. There might be a difference. I'm unaware of it if there is. And then I'm going to go to the material, click on it, get access to this button, click on that, and search up at the top for gypsum. Choose my gypsum, click OK, and then I don't have to actually do a thickness because this already had a thickness of a 1/2 inch from that plywood, so I can leave that alone. The structure, I'm still going to want that to be softwood lumber, but this is made out of a 2x4 instead of a 2x6. So I'm just going to highlight this number 5 and change it to a 3. And then just click off of it. And now we have our total thickness and our R value and everything's still assigned. This one I can leave alone because this interior partition is a piece of gypsum wallboard, or 2x4, and then another piece of gypsum wallboard. Click OK, and OK again. And now I have this interior wall, my partition. For my constraints, it's going to remember the constraints I used last time and assume I want to use them again. which can be wonderful, but in this case, I actually don't want to use them again, or I want to use some of them. I want to use this base constraint of level 1, and I want to use a top constraint of level 2. But for interior walls, we're actually measuring them from center. So for my location line, I'm going to do, and I could do wall center line or core center line. In this scenario, I'll just do core. In most scenarios, that's what I want anyway, but since this wall is even on both sides, it wouldn't make a difference. And then I'm just going to go right from the midpoint, straight down, and it's going to join all of that for me and clean up like all of my corners and edges, and I don't have to worry about anything, which is so wonderful and nice. So I'll just click escape to end that line command, or that wall command, and then I'll hit escape to end the command in total. And again, I'm just going to come look at it three-dimensionally. If I want to orbit around 3D, I'm going to hold the shift key on my keyboard and press down on my scroll wheel, and I can orbit around my house and look at it from different points of view. And then I also have some elevations here that are going to already become just defined as I make my building. So if I double click on east, my east elevation is already started. I double click on north, south, and it'll start applying these for me up here automatically, which can be really nice and wonderful. So I don't have to worry about making these elevations, because as I just build out my floor plan and as I start placing in like my doors and windows, the elevations are going to get applied for me automatically. Now let's put some doors and windows in here. So for my door that's sitting here, it's sitting 4 feet off of this. So I'm going to come up to the door tool, and I'm just going to use this single flush door that's already in here. They're defined by their width and their height. So this one is 3 feet wide, and 84, I believe, would be, that'd be 7 feet, right? We're going to need a calculator. Hi, Jose. 7 times 12. Yeah. Woo. So I want the 80-inch one. That's what I was pretty sure, but I just didn't want to seem like an idiot again since I didn't know counterclockwise and clockwise. So I'm going to use this 36 by 80, and by default it's going to come up with some measurements. Unfortunately, those measurements that pop up by default are going from center line, and I do want to measure from the outside. So I'm just going to click to place it, and even if you place it the wrong way, these little arrows that pop up allow you to change which way the door swings, and then if it opens into a room or out of a room. So if it doesn't place automatically the way you want it to, you can always just quickly change it around. After you place it too, these blue temporary dimensions just allow you to kind of quickly click on that and change it to say like, oh, I want this to be 4 feet. And if I hit enter, then it's 4 foot. However, we want it to be 4 feet from the face of, so that's just one thing to keep in mind, that really that's not going to matter. This button here is cool in a lot of regards. For this particular thing, we wouldn't want to use it, but if I click on that button, it actually makes those permanent dimensions that are just in my drawing. So that way I don't have to go add them after the fact. But again, I don't actually want these permanently in here, so I'm just going to Control Z to undo that, and I'll just place dimensions afterwards. For my door here, I'm going to have to place a cased opening. However, if you noticed when I went to my different door options, there is no cased opening. The only one that was loaded in by default was this single flush door. So to load in different doors, I'm going to come up to load family, and then I'm going to look through all of these different components. So the components are in different folders, and they're organized pretty well to help you remember like what's in each folder. So if we're going to try to figure out where the doors are, most likely they're going to be in this doors folder. So if I double click on doors, it gives me access to different door options, as well as even more details of different doors. If I click on a door once, it lets me see a little preview of it. These curtain wall doors can only be added into a specific wall type that's called a curtain wall, which is a glass one. So I cannot load these in using the door tool. Frustrating, I know, but that's how it works. And I just want this one called door opening. I'm going to click on open, and it's going to load it in. And then I'll click on my door options here just to change it to that 3 foot by 6'8" option. And then I'm just going to click to place it. I always just kind of round about where I want things, and then afterwards I'll go put in the details. And so since it knows this is a cased opening and not a door, it puts in the hidden lines for us automatically. It fixes all of these little details and trims everything for us automatically, just like it did here with this door too. It put the symbol in. So Revit's taking care of a lot of that architectural symbol stuff for us since it knows what it's doing. Again, then if I go look at this 3D, I can hold the shift key and the scroll wheel and I can orbit around and I can see, there's my little opening there. In 3D mode, I like to change my visual style too. So I'm going to change it down here, which I almost went to go click on it in OBS like an idiot. From a visual style of the hidden line to consistent colors. You can go into realistic. My high school students love looking at their 3D model in realistic. This is most likely what's going to crash your computer, particularly if you're just working on your own laptop. This is not a good idea because especially as your building gets heftier and more detail gets added in, it's going to just lead to some disasters. So I like consistent colors because it then again gives me those like the stuff that we applied in that appearance tab or the properties tab. So this is where like when we check off use render appearance, it gives it that color. We've got our gypsum wallboard inside. It lets me know like, hey, I did in fact apply a material here, and gives it just a little bit more of reassurance for me. You can move in just hidden line, but for 3D, I like to be in consistent colors, so that's where I'm going to stay. And so then if we look at just our elevation, so if I go back into my south elevation, it added in that door for us. It put the symbol in there because we put a door in our model. And this is all of these views are linked together. And then in the elevation, if I decide, you know what, I want this door actually moved over here, I can click and drag it, or I could even type in a specific place of where I want it to go. And then if I go back into my level 1 floor plan, my door is over here now. So it's going to keep everything linked together. So if you make changes, you don't have to worry about making changes in like the elevation view and the floor plan and any subsequent sections, because everything is just linked together all nice and neat. Let me just Control Z to put my door back where I had it. Then I'm going to add in some windows as well. So I'm going to have a window here, here, and 2 over here. And so I'm going to go into my window tool. By default, we have these we have some fixed windows, some casement style windows, and some double hung. If we look at our instructions here, it says we have fixed windows. The size descriptions can be found on the drawings. And if we look at our drawings, our windows are 3 feet wide, 4 foot, 8 inches tall. So that's what this little tag here is for. It's in 3 feet 0 inches wide, 4 feet 8 inches tall, and that's like for this door here it says that it's 3 feet 0 inches wide, 6 foot 8 inches tall, and that's just how these doors and windows are tagged. And so there is no particular window at that exact size, so we're going to have to make our own. And so I'm going to go into edit type, and I'm going to duplicate this. You always want to duplicate things before you make any changes to like the width and heights. So I'll hit duplicate, and I'm just going to name this, what would that be? 48 plus 8 would be 56. So I'm just going to name this 36 by 56, just because I always like to stay consistent with their naming scheme, so that way it's easier to find my stuff. And I'll click OK. Now I still have that 3 foot by 4 foot in case I ever need it again in a project or in this project. I won't, but if I did, and then I'm just going to come here and change the height from 4 feet. I'll just highlight that 8 or that 0 and turn it into an 8. So now this is 4 foot 8 inches tall. And I'll click OK. And now it's going to automatically make it that window size that I wanted. I can also, in edit type, I can change things like the materials that it's made out of. It's a little bit different than the way the wall kind of parameters and types function. But if I wanted to change material, that's where like I can click here for this glass, and I could change it to a different material if I wanted to. I can't imagine why I want to change my glass. But, you know, like the sash or the framing around it, if I wanted to change that, I can. But I'll just leave it all alone. And for now, what I'm going to do is just place window, window. I don't have them in a particular spot. I'm going to move them into place after the fact. Window, window, window. So I've got my windows placed. Again, they're not in my particular spots. So I always just kind of estimate where I want things to be, and then afterwards when I'm placing dimensions is when I get into those nitty-gritty details for it, which we are going to place some of those dimensions and just alignments right now. So to place dimensions, there's 2 ways you can go do that. You can either go to the Annotate tab, and then there are dimension options up in here. I don't like to get out of this architecture tab whenever I can help it, because just so much of what I'm going to be doing is in this tab. So I instead use this option up here in the quick toolbar. So I'm just going to always use an aligned dimension, and then that'll just start my dimension option. And whenever I want to place one, if I want to go to the face of this stud, by default it wants to do it on the center. And so all I'm going to do, and this again is where having this thin line option turned on is super helpful, is hover my mouse over where I want it to go, which is the face of this stud, and then I'm going to hit tab on my keyboard, and it'll go then to the outside of it. If you're trying and it keeps just giving you the ba-dum, I can't do it, that's because you're too high up. So this is technically still part of this wall. I want to do the face of this one, so I've got to just move my cursor down a little bit, hit tab, and then I can click on the face of the stud, and then I'll just click again for the center, and then to place it I'll just click, and then it's going to give me my measurement, and I'll hit escape twice to leave the tool. If I want to change what's written in here, I have to click on something that is related to it, like this window. So if I click on this window, this text box then changes into something that I can edit. If I click on this wall, this text box changes into something I can edit. But if I just click on the dimension itself, I cannot edit this text. If I double click it, I can replace it with like something that says like, oh, typical or type A. One thing that, unless they've changed that, like that I can't do, is just change it to say like 4'8" or 4'0". So I can't just override it with a number that I actually want. I can make it, you know, just say like, oh, typical, which I should have it in all caps, but I can just change it to say something like that. But I cannot double click and override the value itself, which I love, because otherwise kids just are like, oh, I'll move it, and no one would ever know. So again, I've got to like click on this window, and then I can click on this 4 foot 4 3/8 and just say 4, enter, and it'll shift the window. So now this is 4 feet. Anytime I alter dimensions to what I want them to be in the final result, I also always click this lock. So that way, as other things move around, so for instance, if I took this wall and I wanted to use the arrow keys on my keyboard to shuffle this wall over, it'll make this wall grow, but it'll always make sure this window moves with it. Because I said this wall, the distance between the face of this stud and this window has to be 4. Let me just Control Z to undo that, because I had my wall where I wanted it to be. Whoops. Control Y to redo, because I undid a little too much. So now I've got that set at 4 feet. So again, I'll place another dimension. I'll just do an aligned dimension. I'll just double check too that my 24 foot is here. And if something went a little askew, maybe I didn't change my core boundary or like the face of the core when I placed it, I can always just make it up after the fact. So I'm just going to hover over this, click tab, make sure I'm clicking on the face of the stud to the face of the stud. So that's like the face of the sheathing. And then I can move it up to place it. And again, I'm going to lock this into place so that way it stays at 24. I'm going to place another one saying that this whole thing is 12. So I'll hit tab from there to there is 12. Even if it's not the right dimension, I can still just keep going and place the rest of my dimensions. But since mine is correct, I am going to lock it. Face of stud to the center of this window. I'll click it. And then I'll do this one later on. And I actually am not going to place any dimensions for like from the face of the stud to this door, or this one, because I'm going to show you a tool that we can use to just automatically apply that later after the fact. So I'll hit escape twice to get out of the command. And again, then I'm just going to start moving. Really, for this one, I just need to move this window so that this window is also 4 feet. So I'll just click on the window itself, and then it allows me to edit this dimension. So I'm just going to say 4, enter, and now this window is 4 feet, and I'll click on the dimension to lock it. And I just like locking things so that this way, like let's say I took this wall and I wanted to move it down. Like instead it's just shifting the entire building with it. It's shifting everything that's locked in place, because otherwise these aren't moving along with it because those aren't locked in place yet. But I am going to lock them in just a moment. Without using the dimension option, instead I'm going to use the align option, because if we look at our building, this window is lined up to be centered with this door and this window over here as well. And this door is centered with this one. And so using align and locking things into place with align can often be helpful, because then if I wanted to change one of these dimensions, the other things that are lined up with them will change as well. So if I have like a series of doors going down a hallway, or just, cased openings going through a hallway, I probably want to keep them lined up with each other so that way they stay nice and aligned. So I'm going to use the align tool up here. And when it does, sure, I'll save my project. But align is up here, and I'm just going to say that I want the center of this to be lined up with the center of this. And it just ever so slightly shifted that door down, so that way they're lined up with each other. And then I'll just lock them into place. So again, to just show you kind of what that means. So if I hit escape, if I wanted to change this, now to be 5 feet instead of 4 feet, I can click on this window, and I can click on this dimension, or I guess first I'm going to unlock it. I can click on this dimension and I can say 5, enter, and it shifted the door with it, because I said wherever this goes, this is going to move with it. So that's just where locking your dimensions in place can help. And so again, and this window I'll even put down here just so you can really see how the align tool snaps into place. So I'll go align, I'll click on the center of this door to the center of that window, and it moves it so that they are kind of paired with each other. If I don't click lock, I can move this door and this window won't move with it. So it is just kind of a temporary thing for now. Um, but I always just like to lock things into place just to kind of constrain them into whatever I want them to be. And I'll do the same thing. I'll align the center of this window with the center of this door, and it'll shift the door over. So now this door is also 4 feet from the face of stud, and I'll lock it into place. And I'll hit escape. And now for this window bank, there's 2 ways I could potentially do it. But based on what we know that it's 6 feet from the face of stud to the center of this little bank, and then it's 1'9" from the center of that bank to the center of these windows. So we can do dimensions based off that. However, it's hard for us to measure like where the center of this bank is. So we're going to, in Revit, place some model lines to help us figure some things out. So in the architecture tab, we do have the ability to just straight up draw in lines or features. And so I'm going to use the model line tool to just draw in lines or rectangles as just little reference points. Whenever I'm doing lines like this, I always like to change the line style to, well, usually there's one here that's invisible, but I guess not. That's okay. So I guess I'll just leave it set as a regular line and then just delete it after the fact. And I'm just going to draw a line from the face of this stud. So I'm just going to click to start it here. And I'm going to go over 6. I don't have to put a foot mark because it's going to know that that's 6 feet. And I'm just going to put a big line down. Doesn't matter how far you go down, because for me this is just going to be a reference point. And then I'm going to go over 3 inches. So I did 0 space 3, enter, big line up. Again, this is just a reference point. And then I'm going to go over in the other direction 6 inches. So 0 space 6, enter, big line down. So this is just me kind of referencing out where I want that 6-inch spacer between this window bank to go. And then I'll just hit escape twice to end the command. And I'm going to click on this window and drag it into place. And so this is just going to help figure out where they go. If I want to get it specifically right on there, my best bet is to use this move tool, where then I can click right on the edge of the window and then where I want it to go. I'll do the same thing with this window. So now I'll just click on this one, move, click on the edge of the window where I want it to intersect. And so now these windows are in place, which means I can come back and highlight these and then use the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of them. Because I don't want those lines in my end result. They were just there again to help me figure out where this window bank was going to go. And now I can use my dimension tool to lock those into place. So I'm just going to hit tab, make sure I'm getting the edge of the stud to the center of this window, which actually, let me do this instead. I'll hit escape again. I'm going to do, don't I already have a model line? So I already have a model line here for the 6 feet. So I'm just going to draw one down, and it's going to sit behind here. And I'm going to, for me, I'm just going to pull and drag it so that this way it's purely, you can't see it at all behind my house in this view, which is great. And I'll do an align dimension from the face of the stud. You can also use the tab key to shuffle through options too. So if you don't want to zoom in to get the face, you can just tab your way to it, to the middle. That way I get that 6 foot And then I can place in another dimension from the middle of the window to there, from the middle of the window to there. And if I want these two to be aligned with each other, if I just hover over that to click to place it, it'll put them aligned. And then I'll lock, hit escape twice, click on this one, lock it, click on this one, lock it. So that way, everything now in my building, since I've locked these dimensions after I've placed them, are always going to stay there. And if I look at it 3D, I've got my building starting to take shape. So I've got my windows here. If at any point too you've placed your windows inside out, so if I hit the space bar, this kind of bigger area, this windowsill should be inside the building, but again, you can just use the space bar in any view to flip them inside or outside. In some windows it makes more, like the casement window is usually very obvious if you put it in the wrong way because that symbol will show you. And then if I like look at my south elevation, I can see my building start to take shape. And same thing if I go to like my north, my east, my west, all of my elevations are starting to come into place because every one of these views is linked. So for this practice, we're actually going to leave it here today, and we're going to make sure that we save our work. So I'm just going to come up here to save my drawing and just verify that it's saved. If you're ever unsure that it's saved or not, because it doesn't really look like it did anything, but what it did was just override the previous one that I had here. You can go into your files, and I have mine in this architecture one, I believe. And so right here is my file name. And since I have my view options set to show me details, it says here that this was last saved on the 19th at 12:09, and it's currently 12:10. So that was probably like 12:09 in a couple seconds. These are here was what I was talking about with those backups that it saves for you every so often. So you can erase these if you'd like. You can hold on to them, but if it has this series of numbers behind it, that is just those backups it's saving. So this is where we're going to leave it. Next class, we're going to go over adding in floors and roofs and different components and changing some of those levels up. But we've gotten quite a lot done for this one so far.